So first I want to talk about the interview process. If you're going to interview somebody, it's kind of a neat thing. It's one of the things I enjoy the most about my job is interviewing people. And fortunately, when you've done something for 20 plus years, I've been doing HM Magazine for 27 years, so it's nice to have experience under your belt because things become a little bit easier. It becomes more natural for you. And so some of the things I take for granted. One of the first parts of interviewing somebody is coming up with questions. And I take that very seriously. And like we have interns at HM Magazine that come, and usually they'll stay for 2 months, and that intern will get an experience, a well-rounded experience of what it takes to put out a magazine. They'll get their hands dirty doing customer service work, calling people, talking with publicists, and arranging stories and interviews for a freelance writer. They'll be talking to writers. They'll be doing some writing themselves. They'll be editing other people's writing. They'll be doing some layout and design. They'll be maybe doing some advertising sales. So they come away after 2 months, which is what our cycle was for years and years. We were a bi-monthly magazine, which doesn't mean twice a month, it means every 2 months. And then semi-annual means twice in a year. So sometimes bi and semi kind of are weird words that get flipped one way for a month and another way for years, but that's how it goes. But in that 2 month cycle, an intern would learn a lot about the magazine, what it takes to put out a magazine, which was great for college students or high school students sometimes. They had a few of those. And we had something far away as Holland and Canada and states from all over the country. And they usually had a really good time. I didn't force them, but I encouraged each intern to keep a diary. And I said, you have the ability to say no. This is day 1 of your internship. This is something I would like you to do. Feel free to say no, but if you do it, I want you to keep the intern diary. Most of them knew about it, and they were excited about doing that themselves. So I set up a separate webpage blog for them, and I encouraged them every day at the end of the day, stop working 10 or 15 minutes before 5 o'clock, and just write about what you did that day. And at the end of your internship, you've got this great story and its tale and its chronological timeline that you can turn into your professor to help get credit and document what you've done, because it's all right there. And so if you ever want to check that out, just go to hmmag.com, and on the side navigation, when you're on the interior page, there's a bunch of different links, and one of them is intern diaries, and you can check out what they did. But one of the things I would encourage them to do is, write down your interview questions. Most interviews are done over the phone. There's a whole different dynamic when you're face to face. You've got eye contact, and if you're interviewing somebody and you don't really respect them a whole lot, they're going to know. Unless you're a really, really good actor, they're going to know that you just think they suck, or you're just doing this for a job, or you can't wait till this is over so you can go eat, or because your face will betray you unless you're a really, really good actor like Roger here. So there's a whole different dynamic when you're face to face versus over the phone. But most interviews, for convenience sake, are done over the phone. There's different examples, like when a movie is coming out, and they'll have like a press junket, and a bunch of media people, usually at their own expense, but sometimes the movie company will fly media out, and they'll be able to sit down and they'll be able to talk to different people that are involved in a movie or a book or an album, and they'll get to do some face-to-face time. And a lot of times those are shorter interviews. They're maybe 10 minutes where they just get to ask bullet point questions. But predominantly, a lot for convenience, you can cover more media outlets. A lot of interviews are done over the phone. It's usually half an hour, and I would tell the interns, you need to come up with about at least 12 questions to cover half an hour if you've got somebody that's going to talk. And one of the first things I tell people is to ask open-ended questions. An open-ended question is like, how do you feel about this, or why, or explain, or please extrapolate on this, or please explore this idea, or elaborate on this, please, as opposed to how old are you, what is your favorite color, what is your favorite song on the album, how many years have you been a drummer. All these questions can be answered with a number or a single word answer, and you're going to run through 12 questions pretty fast if they're all closed-ended questions. And the purpose of an interview in the sense of a media outlet, like a book or magazine or newspaper, is to entertain, maybe inform and educate at the same time. So you want people to talk. You want them to open up and to talk. And so you want to ask open-ended questions. You really want to prepare your questions well. Like when I interviewed this band called HIM, it's the initials HIM. Some people have referred to the HIM standing for His Infernal Majesty. Some of their lyrics kind of use religious imagery in kind of a negative way. So I don't really know, where the guy's head is. But I had a chance to interview him, and my first question, I prepared for this interview. It was easy for me, one, because I really like this band's music. So I knew a little bit about them already. I didn't have to research on somebody I knew nothing about. So it was kind of natural for me to enter into this interview. So my first question was, sex, a gift from God or a product of evolution? What are the ramifications of both? And so that was a question that just dove right in. I didn't waste time trying to ease into it or ask some generic light questions or what they call softball questions. I just waited for a question that I think he would like to respond. A lot of his, they're a modern day rock band, like a lot of rock bands, sexuality is a common topic. And when you're not living for Christ, you're not living under guidelines or rules necessarily, except ones you make up on your own. So I thought this would probably be a question that might make him think, that he might like to answer. And so I asked him, and that got the ball rolling right away. That interview's in this book, so if you get the book or you read that article in the magazine, you'll remember that he really responded to it. And at one point he said, I'm still reeling from that question, And I really like when I hear feedback like that, because it's nice to know that you got somebody to think. One aspect that's been kind of fun about these interviews over the years, and I think one reason why it's popular, is because I've been asking artists questions that maybe other interviewers don't ask too often. If you think about this rock star is sitting in an office in a room by himself at Atlantic Records, maybe for 6 or 8 hours one day. He's going to do a bunch of interviews, 30-minute interviews, back to back to back to back to back. So right after HM Magazine, he's got WKRP in Cincinnati, or he's got the New York Times to talk to, or somebody else. And so they're hearing the same old questions over and over and over again. Why did you name your new album Alice in Wonderland? Tell us about your new video. What do you like about the music scene today? And they're just hearing the same questions over and over again. So when I ask them, what do you think about Jesus Christ? Usually they'll go, excuse me? Can you repeat that question? My gosh, did you really ask me that? And a lot of times, depending upon their viewpoint, a lot of times they appreciate it. Even if they're not a gung-ho Christian that wants to affirm their faith publicly in a magazine, they'll appreciate the fact that it got them to think. And it was a deviation from, because when you're sitting in a room with a bottle of water to drink and you're surrounded by 4 little walls and you're just getting the same questions over and over again, pretty soon you go on autopilot. You might be excited for the fact that your words are going to be printed in the LA Times tomorrow, but still you would kind of get tired of it after a while and bored. So I think the artists, and I've been given this feedback a lot of times, they appreciate the fact that your questions are different. So that's really one thing I encourage people to do. If you have a chance to do interviews, is think hard about your questions. Try to have questions that are informed. Some people get kind of offended when a reporter's interviewing them and they're uninformed. I remember back when I was much younger, I was interviewing a Christian artist that wasn't too really hard rock. It was an artist named Kim Hill, and it was at this festival at Six Flags. And I went to this place where all the interviews were being done. I was talking to the publicist, and I guess the artist was finishing up another interview or doing something, and the publicist had told me that she overheard a conversation between this artist and another artist from the Choir, which is a band I really like. And she got like, oh, Derry, I hate doing these interviews. I did an interview once where the guy goes, so what instrument do you play? And you can tell it really offended her that some dorky reporter didn't even know what she did in the band or whatever. And so my first question was a well-thought question. It was, who is Kim Hill? For me, it was a philosophical question, who is Chad Sides? What makes you tick? And she's like, are you kidding me? Because she thought I was saying, who are you? What instrument do you play? So I totally got off on the wrong foot on that interview, and I laughed about that because it was such classic miscommunication. But it drives home the point that artists, like if it's a music interview, having heard the album is a great bonus, because then you can talk about specific things. Some of the best interviews I've done, when I look back at them later, I was asking about a specific guitar solo and how they got that tone, or a specific lyric. And one thing about people in general is people love to talk about themselves. If you're at a dinner party, you can use this gift tonight, and you meet somebody new. Well, tell me about yourself. What do you do? And in general, most people like to talk about themselves and what they do. It's just kind of a product of who we are. I'm the same way. And so artists, when you're showing information that you're informed a little bit and you ask them a question that's kind of intelligent, you can understand what they've done, it kind of opens the door a little bit for them to let their guard down and explain more about what they do. And they're probably more than happy to explain how they got that guitar tone, or what this lyric meant, or why they use this particular video director. So those are kind of fun tips about doing interviews. Sometimes I've done face-to-face interviews, and those have an interesting dynamic. I remember interviewing a band called Cradle of Filth. They were kind of a scary core band, kind of in the vein of, they didn't sound like Marilyn Manson, but kind of Korn, Marilyn Manson, kind of a scary core, lots of mascara and creepy lyrics and creepy sounding, soundtracky type music between songs. So I was interviewing this band, and I was on their bus, their tour bus, and so I was in the front in the kitchen area, and sitting around the table was the entire band. And it's a whole different dynamic when you ask a question like, what do you think about Jesus Christ, or what are your thoughts on teenage suicide, and how do you respond to that, or questions that are maybe a little bit deeper or more personal than normal. And dealing with 5 people and they're all staring at you, it's a different dynamic than just one person on the phone. I remember being a little bit nervous with that interview. There's an interview that stands out on my mind forever that's in the Rockstars on God Volume 1. It was Henry Rollins. And it was an interview I was excited about because I knew he had a reputation for being kind of a tough guy. He was in a lot of seminal punk bands growing up, and Black Flag. And he had a reputation for being pretty smart and quick on his feet. And I'd seen him on TV interview other artists, like at an MTV event or something. He was being a journalist. And so I thought this would be a fun interview. And prior to the interview, I was ready with my dozen questions. But I had a friend up in Seattle who was like a Henry Rollins expert. He was a really big fan of Henry Rollins. So I sent him an email that says, hey Chris, I'm going to be interviewing Henry Rollins next Wednesday. If you have any questions or things you think I should ask him because you know so much about him, let me know. So he gives me like 7 or 8 questions that I should bring up and ask him. And sometimes it's kind of fun to do it if you're not informed, and sometimes somebody else that knows more than you will find more information than even your research will give you. So he had a couple questions. One of them was, how did you get roped into hosting that show? Can't remember the name of the show. You do a good Rod Serling imitation, by the way, I think. And instead of rewording that question in my own words and paraphrasing it so it was coming from me, I was reading that question word for word from my friend Chris Esty. So I asked him, how did you get roped into hosting that show? He interrupted me, why did you word it that way? Are you trying to be a flippant blankety blank here or what? I said, I guess I'm just being a flippant blankety blank. And another point in the interview, he was like, the directions of this interview better change or this interview is going to end in 30 seconds. And I asked him a question about one of his friends who had died. He's like, we're not going there, pal. And I could just imagine the veins in Henry Rollins' neck were bulging. And if it was a face-to-face, I would be being choked right now. So that was a good time where having it be a phoner was a benefit. But I'll never forget the tension in that interview. Overall, when I do these interviews, even though it's over the phone, it's being recorded by a tape recorder, like a little micro cassette recorder is what I usually use because I have a transcriber machine that's hooked to a foot pedal. And so when I'm trying to transcribe and they're talking so fast that I can only type so fast, when I let off the pedal, it not only pauses the tape, but it rewinds maybe a couple seconds. You can adjust how far it rewinds. And that compensates for your reaction time because the time your brain says, I need to stop, but my fingers are being overloaded, the reaction time between that thought and your foot lifting up takes a little bit of time, and some words were spoken and you've got to go back. And so the machine actually rolls back for you, which is nice. So a lot of times I'll use a micro cassette recorder even though it's the year 2012. I do have a digital voice recorder that I like to use a lot now too because I can use those and they're ready for a podcast. The audio quality is just good enough to go where it's already an MP3 file and I can edit it into my podcast. So a lot of times I'm fishing around with that and doing interviews that way. And lost my train of thought. I got lost when I told you how I recorded the interviews. Oh well, I'm sure it'll come back eventually. The guy that wanted to kill me over the phone. I was going to kind of make a generic comment about interviews. By and large, it's a recorded event. Got it. It's very much, I'm sheltered, I'm separated from them on a phone line. I'm recording the situation. I can edit my words if I wanted to. I could make them sound better if I wanted to. But I treat it like I'm live on TV. For some reason, I don't know why I actually view it that way, but for me, I have the pressure as an entertainer to provide an interview that's entertaining. And so if they don't want to talk about Jesus or God or anything religious, for my audience, which is predominantly a Christian music-loving audience, and these are believers, if I can't talk and tap into that subject, I feel like I've let down my readership. So I usually find a way to kind of work my way around to come back to talk about religion. Like maybe I'll say, even though this isn't about your album, who doesn't want to read an interview with Bono where he talks about God? I mean, when he talks in Rolling Stone magazine about God at length, it's just fascinating to hear. One of my favorite quotes from Bono is he really only likes to listen to music that's written by people that are either running to or running from God, because the dynamic of both and what those people are wrestling with on either direction are just fascinating and captivating. And so I like that. So when I'm talking to these people, I treat it like I'm live on the radio or live on TV, and I've got to save the interview if it starts to go south, and I've got to scramble. And sometimes I have to deal with that. I've got to find ways to either get back to my subject or ease the tension, like if I've accidentally insulted them or said something, I've got to find a way to get them to start talking again. And so the pressure's on. When I'm doing that 30-minute interview, I feel like I've got to perform and I've got to be on my toes. I can't ever really relax and check out and go on autopilot. I've got to be prepared to maybe salvage the interview or take it in a different direction. So sometimes that's a real challenge, even though it's over the phone. One thing I've done over the years is I've always been faithful to reprint what they say word for word. And nobody trained me to do that, but I just thought, if I'm going to ask them about what they think of Jesus Christ, which is probably the most important question of all time, and I'll get back to that in a second, I want to accurately say and reproduce what they say. I would hate to misrepresent them, because whenever I write, no matter what it is, I kind of picture, okay, who is my audience? And I think everything I do, that God is watching. So God is part of my audience, and I really need to do my work at the best of my ability. I don't need to sloth through something, but perform with the most excellence I can for His glory and for Him, and to say thank you for this opportunity and these skills or whatever, and try to always be sharpening them and improving them for Him. And I think that consumers or the general public is reading what I write. Like if it's an album review, I owe them an honest answer. Like that kid who works at Taco Bell, he needs to know if this album is worth his hard-earned $15. So I need to give him an honest answer. If the album is not really up to standards, I need to be bold enough to tell that consumer the truth. So I've got that part of the audience that I need to please and write towards and keep in mind. And then thirdly, I think whenever I write something, particularly with music, is the artist or the artist's mom or their family or their manager or their bandmates are going to read this. And so like with an album review, again, if I'm going to offer criticism, I should probably be constructive. I shouldn't just say these guys suck, they should get a gun right now and end it all, they should quit music, they don't belong in the music industry. That would just be destructive. And hopefully most people would just be able to slough that off and say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But my criticism should be constructive and offer them hope on maybe how to improve that. You know what constructive criticism is like. It's just spun in a positive way that offers you some hope. It's not telling you that you completely suck and you're a worthless human being and don't deserve to be on this earth. You're telling them that the vocals are a little bit pitchy, like a judge on American Idol might say, or the guitar solos were too long, or the intros were too long, or something that they can change or fix next time. If they happen to agree with your assessment, you're offering them something they can fix and they can change. Like, I hate the yellow color of that fence. Well, the next time they paint the fence, they can paint it white or red or something. You're offering them criticism that they can change. So I think that's important. So when I'm talking to them, doing this interview, I kind of think about the same things, that later on they're going to read this interview. So if they're going to be talking about personal things like their faith, I want to be faithful to reproduce it accurately. And I found out after a couple years of doing that, a few bands and their managers would stop me and say, hey Doug, I just wanted to say we really appreciate the fact that you actually print what we actually say. You will not believe how many times we're misquoted. And so we just really appreciate that. Keep up the good work. And I really took that to heart. That was like a really, I think creative people need encouragement. I think encouragement is like food for a creative person. And when I say creative person, that's not just people involved in the arts or music or sculpture or painting, dance. It's, there's lots of work that we do that's actually creating things. It may be, programs, or maybe more, you may think of more paperwork or people programs, or helping people but these are all still creative things. You're using your creative energies and your God-given gifts to make things. So I think encouragement is like food for the creative person. It really lifts us up. And that comment from that manager was a real shot in the arm that helped encourage me to go on. And so I kind of take that to heart, and that kind of furthered my conviction to reproduce these interviews accurately, word for word. And for years, I would even go so far as to include the uhs in there. And sometimes I'll clean that up a little bit, but if I'm asking them a question that makes them stammer and go, oh my gosh, well, I think that's important. So sometimes I'll keep that in. Like if I ask them, what do you think about Jesus Christ? Well, that hesitation communicates something, in my opinion. So sometimes it's important. So sometimes I'll use my judgments. It's a subjective call on how much to clean up somebody's words. But I certainly want to be accurate. And sometimes when you're using that transcribing machine, the quality of the phone connection and the analog tape, and you're playing a little speaker you're playing it on, or the mono signal coming in one ear in your headphones, it's hard to hear what they say, and sometimes you have to play it back again and again and again, sometimes 17, 20 times, having to really think about, okay, what was the context of what he was saying? What can I remember about that interview? Because sometimes with my production cycle, I'll spend 2 months putting out a magazine, and I'll put off the transcribing like a month and a half into that cycle. So I've got like 2 weeks left to put this magazine to press, and that's when I'm interviewing. And I may have interviewed 4 or 5 other artists between this interview and now. So it's hard for me to remember the context of the conversation. Sometimes it's easier than others, and sometimes I've had staff members. Like I remember my assistant editor, a guy named Brian, and he was transcribing an interview with Doug Pinnick, who is the bass player for King's X. And for some reason, Doug Pinnick was referencing the Jimi Hendrix album, which is called Axis, Bold as Love. And Brian transcribed that as Boulder Jackson Love Bites. How he got that, but I like to share that a lot because those are funny. Like, is that what they're saying? Is it Smoking Walter, the fire engine guy? Is that what that song says? Or, excuse me while I kiss this guy? A lot of times we don't really know what we're hearing. We have to kind of listen to it again and again. But that's become important to me, and it's been appreciated, and so I like to encourage other people to do that. And it's kind of a drag, and it kind of shames me to think about how often reporters misquote people or rewrite what they say, or they try to fit what they're writing and what the person they're interviewing into their own angle. And I think that's personally just kind of abusive and manipulating, and I don't want to kind of go there. So when I was a college student, I decided I wanted to do a magazine at the end of my junior year. It took me 5 years to graduate and get my degree from the University of Texas. So I had 1 year to go after I started this magazine, and I took 12 hours of journalism courses. I took a couple feature writing classes that really helped, and then we wrote a heck of a lot of stuff. And because I switched from a Bachelor of Science degree in engineering, I was when I came out of high school, my goal was to get a job. I wanted a paycheck, and my dad was an engineer, so I thought aerospace engineering, I'll try that. And I got an F in my intro to aerospace class my first semester. It took 17 hours. I got an F in physics 303. I got a D in calculus 808A. And so the writing was on the wall pretty soon that I wasn't going to go the engineering route. So I switched over to liberal arts and did a heck of a lot of writing. So I kind of look back and I can see how it was preparing me for my eventual vocation. But I had no idea when I was a kid or even in college what I wanted to do with my life. So with 1 more year to go, I juggled together 12 hours, so I have a minor in journalism. Looking back, I have one regret. I wish I would have taken an editing class, because I had to learn the hard way how to edit and how to cut out words. Because for me, words become important, especially if it's my own writing or something the interviewer said. Sometimes the wisdom or the insight they're bringing to a story. And I hate to chop that up, I hate to cut that up, but I've only got so many pages, I've got to make it fit. And if you're a professional editor, or you take an editing class in college, they probably teach you how to be ruthless, how to just cut, chop, cut away, kind of be impersonal about it, and just condense, and make it fit, and get good at that. So I never really had training for that, had to learn the hard way, and over the years, learn how to craft my stories to fit. So that was kind of fun.